Isabella Sanchez Castañeda, welcome to the Rest of Us podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am very excited for our conversation. We talked last week before this podcast, and we had a really great conversation that we had to kind of cut short because I felt like we were just recording a podcast. So I'm excited to kind of get into that more right now. But before we get into your story and kind of your business and the rest of the conversation, I'll just have you introduce yourself and what you do and what your business is.
Yeah. So as you already mentioned, my name is Isabella Sanchez Castañeda. I'm a podcast strategist and producer for entrepreneurs, and I'm based out of the Philadelphia area.
Perfect. So let's just kind of jump into your story. What got you into business, or at least where did you kind of start, I guess, your thoughts about getting into business?
Yeah, so I was a 2020 graduate. For the video version, I do have a little 2020 badge in the back. And we all know what happened then. Graduated via Zoom. I was very fortunate that actually one of my internships panned out and they offered me a job right after, but it wasn't necessarily what I expected nor what I really wanted to do. I then experienced being furloughed and kind of laid off for periods of time from that same place. And so it was just something where I wasn't enjoying myself. I didn't really love where I was, and I knew that it wasn't stable. So I started looking elsewhere. And that was actually when I got the first opportunity to produce a podcast. And from that, I was able to kind of see there's another way. I can handle this a little differently. I can really venture out on my own, which I don't think was the norm doing that straight out of college. Like, people always kind of tell you to get a couple years experience before going out on your own. But just getting that taste at first allowed me to build up that confidence and then eventually branch out on my own.
Yeah. I think, especially 2020, I feel like was that turning point for a lot of people of oh, nothing is stable anymore. If something happens, my job is just gone, whether I was in a good position or not, or the company needs me or not. If costs are being cut, my job could be gone. And I think I was a 2022 graduate. I was still feeling a little bit of that, as I got into the workforce. Well, I didn't even get into the workforce, but as I was trying to get into the workforce, a lot of that of what do we actually need in a company? What does a company actually need? And I feel like, both of us kind of felt that in different ways. So what was your first talk about that first podcasting gig? What all that looked like? Why did you, get into that role? And why did you kind of see that as something I want to pursue further?
Yeah. So I think something super important that I tell any recent graduates or people who are even still in college is you never know what class or what extracurricular activity is going to translate into an opportunity later on. And for me, that was a friend of mine had been approached to be a podcast producer, and she couldn't do it because she was moving. And she remembered that we had taken an audio production class together. So she was like, I know you have at least the basics. So she recommended me, and she was like, hey, I know this person. She's in the area. She's going to stay in the area for a while. And so it was just one of those random opportunities that knocked at your door. And at first I didn't even think I wanted to do it, just because I was like, okay, I took that audio production class, but was that enough? Kind of having those doubts. But then I was able to connect with it was for an agency. I was able to connect with the agency and then eventually their client and just go for it. And I'm still with them today. They are a physical therapy studio, or physical therapy clinic that focuses on sports performance. And so they really wanted a podcast that was on the cutting edge of physical therapy and really talking about the newest technologies and talking with the doctors that had innovative procedures and things like that, which for a lot of us, we might be like, okay, cutting edge physical therapy might not be my thing. But for people who are into it, or people who need the best professionals in recovery, they do really turn to it. So I started with them. That was at the very end of 2020. And I'm still producing for them now. I still go to their clinic on a regular basis, almost weekly, to record. And again, I always emphasize, you never know where that one opportunity is going to come from.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those people who don't really know what a producer role looks like, talk about kind of what that looks like for you, what all you're doing for the podcast, and just kind of your role in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. So the very basics of production is you're usually the person who's there clicking the button, hitting record, and you're the person editing it later. However, in whether you're talking about being a producer at an NPR or a producer more independently like I am, you also find yourself in a lot of a strategy role and a helping shape the show. So that might look a little different for everyone, but for me in particular, that looks like helping, if there's guests, craft the questions, helping strategize what guests we want and who is going to be ideal. If they're not doing guests, maybe it's being more in the weeds of outlining and making sure that what they're sharing on the show actually has relevance to the listeners. And eventually, because I specialize in conversion podcasts, which we can get into, it's a lot of what content is actually going to produce a return on investment for your business rather than just a fun story that you can put out there.
Yeah. So again, we can kind of just jump into that. Like conversion podcasting, it's a little bit different. Like for me, when I think of podcasting, I think of content is big. Like you can get a lot of content from a podcast. You can, build your brand, showcase your personality on a podcast, that thing, or that type of thing. But for you, it sounds like it's that, but it's also how can we actually get an ROI on this? A financial ROI, like getting more clients, getting more return on that podcast, on that episode. So talk about kind of what conversion podcasting is from your perspective and why you chose to go that route.
Yeah. So conversion podcasting, I don't know if this is like an official definition out there, but the way I see it is it's really when you're focusing on selling in your episode. So there is a pitch at the end of your episode. This is ideal for businesses that have some sort of one-on-one component to what they do. So whether that's coaching and you do one-on-one, or that is service work that you're still meeting with a client one-on-one, it allows people to start to understand your personality. It allows them to start to understand what your approach to the problem that you solve really is. And so the difference really is that instead of focusing on how do I make this content as appealing to 1,000 people so that I'm getting listeners every single week and that I can eventually monetize through sponsorship deals or advertisements, think of the things like HelloFresh and BetterHelp and those ad spots you're used to. Instead, we're not going to do any of that. We're going to focus on hitting really niche content that solves a problem or shows that you're able to solve a problem for a specific audience so that they can listen to 4, 5, 6 episodes and say, okay, this is the service provider or coach for me. And they can hire you from there because there's a pitch at the end of the call or at the end of the podcast that says, hey, join my email list, or hey, this is the link to book for a call with me. Let's jump on, talk for 30 minutes about how I can help you with your podcast, or I can help you with I have a business coach as one of my clients. So she says how I can be your business coach for 6 months. And it's very direct. It doesn't mean that it's, only a commercial the whole time. It's still really valuable, but we're focused on monetizing through our own brand rather than monetizing through sponsorship deals that can be pretty limited for the average podcaster who's not getting, the hundreds of thousands of listeners quite yet.
Yeah, I think monetization is something that, when you think about it, you think of sponsorships, you think of BetterHelp, you think of HelloFresh, you think of NordVPN or all these those sponsorships. I'm sure we've heard every single one, all of them, like just sponsor every podcast. They don't have a niche or anything. But it is interesting to kind of monetize through your own brand because you're kind of hitting two areas of you're monetizing the podcast, which is what you want to do. But then you're also just generating more business for yourself. So you're it's like a double, I don't know if a double whammy is the right word, but it's just like you're doing it right. Like you're doing you're empowering your own business, basically, is what I'm trying to say. So I guess my next question would be kind of that style of podcast. It doesn't seem like it's right for everybody. And also, like, especially if people aren't super salesy, they don't want to pitch you, they don't want to do this kind of thing. They want to maybe focus on building a brand. How are you looking at this type of podcasting? I mean, you kind of talked about like who it's right for already, but like, how are you looking at like what this style of podcasting, who should use this style of podcasting versus like who should maybe focus on more of a storytelling brand content focused podcasting style?
Yeah. So I don't think that they necessarily have to be different, the two that you mentioned. I think it's more of the way I break it down is, do you want a passion project podcast or do you want a marketing vehicle? And so a passion project podcast is how I started my podcast originally, where I was jumping on there at the very beginning, it was every day. Then it turned into every week, where I was just sharing, this is what happened to me in business. This is what I've experienced. This is a cool story I want to tell. And I was getting a lot of pleasure from it. Just like I loved putting it out there. I had people who were listening and who said that they really enjoyed what I was doing. But there was no intention per se behind it, in the sense of like, I wasn't expecting it to translate directly into a sales call or an email sign up. And I wasn't even intentional enough about it for social media content, because sometimes it felt just a little random. Mm-hmm. Versus a marketing vehicle podcast, which has a bit more of intention. It has we're talking about this topic because it's in some way, shape, or form related to how I provide service. And that doesn't mean it has to be boring. It's not an infomercial. It's not like those old school TV spots at the end of the night, but it is like, if I'm going to talk about storytelling, which I did last week on my show, if I'm going to talk about storytelling, it's going to be from the perspective of, these are the 3 mistakes I want you to avoid. This is how I helped my client avoid it. This is how I can help you avoid it if you work with me directly. So they're still getting a lot out of it if they don't work with me, but there's the intention of, this is somehow related to, when now you think of podcast storytelling, you're going to start thinking of my brand. And it's, you were asking, like, is it for everyone? I don't think it is for everyone, in the sense of, if you genuinely just want to talk and you want to have a good time and you want to have a conversation, like, I think of the folks who are doing all those like bachelorette watch style ones, or there's now like the actors from Wizards of Waverly Place are doing a podcast. Like, if you just want to do that, and so if you just want to do that with your friends, like, go do it. That is so much fun, but don't expect it to provide results for your business, because I think some people are making the mistake of, just because it's my face, it's going to build my business brand. And it's okay to separate the two. It's okay to have things that are not related to your business, but just know that they're not related.
Yeah, I think that is a really important thing to think about, because I think, for this podcast specifically, I'm kind of balancing the two, where like my intention isn't necessarily to generate leads, but it is also a vehicle for me to showcase what I can do with a podcast. Like, I can produce a podcast, I can tell a story, an interview, or design a story behind it. I can, edit a podcast and put out clips and social clips and all this stuff. But I also am not pitching at the end. So there's kind of like a balance between the two. And I guess before we go any further, I kind of want to go backwards a little bit and talk about just podcasting in general. I think, podcasting has blown up since in the last, 5-6 years, or even like 2 to 3 years, it's really grown. But it's kind of a question of, is it for everybody? And I think, just in general, having a podcast, is it for everybody? Because I would love to provide my services to a lot of different people and have the podcast and, work with a lot of different people. But for some businesses, it may not make sense to have a podcast. Like, not necessarily even what are you going to talk about, because I think there's a lot of topics in each business, but just like, does it make sense in your time to have a podcast and to spend the time on it? So what are your thoughts on like businesses that are thinking about starting a podcast? Like, should everybody have a podcast? Should, only certain types of people have a podcast? What are your thoughts there?
I think the first question is always a question of capacity. So because we listen to podcasts all the time and we think that it's just people talking, it's just a bunch of like conversations. Like, how hard can it be to have a conversation? Yeah. And so a lot of business owners, but also regular folks who just want a podcast, will go into it thinking, this is simple. All I have to do is turn on a microphone and then put it out on the internet. But they're not necessarily thinking about, if you want a podcast that's good, you're going to spend time outlining, or you're going to, if you have guests, you're going to spend time researching them and making sure that your questions are relevant and not the generic ones that they're going to get on every other podcast. You want to make sure that you have time to edit. there's a common thing in the YouTube space that people say where people will tolerate bad video, but they will not tolerate bad audio. And so do you have, even if it's not the fanciest microphone, but do you have a microphone that you know how to use that you will be able to do something with the audio to make it sound nice? And all of these questions are questions of capacity, because if that were the only thing you had to figure out, you could do it in a weekend, but you're a business owner, you have things to do. Or if you're a hobby podcaster, you have a 9 to 5 on top of it. These are questions that take time to really figure out. So number one question is always capacity. Do you actually have the time to figure out podcasting and do it well? And the statistic I always bring up is that there's a bunch of different studies out there about podcast longevity and about how many people stick to it. So only 36% of podcasts ever make it to their 10th episode. And I would bet you that number is actually lower. That's a statistic from 2019. And lower than 36% of people ever make it to their first year in podcasting. And so it's just something that is time consuming, and people plan the first 5 episodes. They don't plan the first 10 or 20. And so you burn out pretty quickly if you're not thinking of your capacity long term.
Absolutely. And I personally can speak on this. I hit, my 11th and 12th episode recently, which is great. And I'm really excited about it. But also the burnout is so real, especially when you get to like 10th or 12th episode. It's not that I don't enjoy it. I don't think anybody that burns out of podcasting would say they don't enjoy it. It's all the other stuff that you have to do, especially once you add video onto the podcast. It's the editing. It's the, do you even have a computer that can handle video editing? Are you cutting up clips? 10 to 12 clips doesn't seem like a ton, but that's a decent amount of time. You're adding captions, you're posting to different social media platforms. And, there are like schedulers, but they're not great. And so you're maybe like for me, I tried to use a scheduler to do everything, like TikTok and LinkedIn and YouTube and Instagram. And I just gave up, and I'm like scheduling half on half on Instagram, half on YouTube, and then I have my drafts on TikTok, and then I'm posting manually to Facebook because like the schedulers just don't work. So like all of these things. And then on top of that, there's the strategy aspect of, are you outlining your questions? Are you researching your guests? Are you having a pre-call like we did? Because, that can help build a little bit of rapport, especially if the person has time to do it. That's a great way to build a little bit of rapport and figure out what you're going to talk about. All of these things are very important to having a successful podcast, and a lot of people don't think about it. I didn't even think about half of them. I found out, I was like, I've done podcasts before. I've edited audio podcasts. I can start my own and just add a little bit of work onto my plate and it'll be fine. No, it's a lot of my time, my mental bandwidth in the week is meeting with people. It's editing. It's doing clips. I was like, I can edit 3 in a week and then have my like next 3 weeks. Like, no, I'm editing week by week because it's just so much time to put into a podcast. So, and if you're trying to do that in-house, it's even more because you're usually adding that workload onto a marketing person that already is like stressed because they have social media to manage and they have emails to write and all this stuff. So the workload of a podcast is so much more than a lot of people think. And there are ways to decrease it in different ways, whether it's you're only going to do audio, or maybe you already have a brand name, like celebrities already have kind of a brand. And so the marketing wise, they don't have to do as much. Or if you bring on like bigger name guests, like if Fortune 500 CEOs, like those type of people are going to bring a lot of traffic to your podcast. So like things like that help with the workload, but overall it's just a ton of work. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, even if they are avid listeners of podcasts or have experienced podcasting before.
Absolutely. And also because the best podcasts make it so seamless that it makes it seem like it's the simplest thing. It's kind of like that whole idea of you go to a dance performance and you're like, I could do that. It's fine.
Yeah.
And then you actually try to do it yourself and you're like, oh my gosh, this is so difficult. It takes so much time and effort to do so well.
Yeah, I think one of the best examples of this is Hot Ones with Sean Evans. If you ever watch that show, every guest will just be like, how do you know about that? Or like Nardwar, like those people, they're like, how do you know about that? How did you hear that? And I'm sure the amount of pre-production they do on those shows is just insane. They're looking at old newspaper articles and they're reading blogs and they're watching interviews and listening to podcasts and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, like they make it look seamless and they make it look so easy and it's all cut together. But the amount of work behind those shows, not even in the physical space of setting up the cameras and the lights and the microphones, but the actual like pre and post production is so much extra work to do. And even if you do just like a fraction of that, it's still a lot of extra work on your plate. So I think it's really important for people if they're, looking at starting a podcast, and if they want to do it in-house, especially look at like, okay, are you going to actually dedicate, 10 hours a week to this? Are you going to actually, spend time outlining and planning and interviewing? Or do you want to outsource it out to like somebody like you or me that can take on some of that role because we have maybe the technical knowledge to do that, which is a conversation people have. But then that turns into from a time thing to a money thing. Do we actually have the money to pay people to bring on a podcast? And I've been in the situation where I've seen both, where like they may have the money, but they don't want to put in the time, or they may have the time, but they don't have the money to do it. And so it's a really hard conversation to have, but they really want to have this piece of marketing material, this podcast to do. They just don't have either the time or the money to do it.
Yeah. And I wanted to go back to a point you were making about Sean Evans and Hot Ones so my degree in college was journalism. And so really focusing on the art of the interview. And it's not just having the right question, it's asking the right question at the right time, in the right tone of voice, connected back to what you just said. And like, it is something that takes so much skill. But we don't think about it because, again, we're so used to just having a conversation at the dinner table and thinking, oh, well, if I can ask a follow-up question there, why couldn't I do that on a podcast? Yeah. And it's all of those little things you have to master that are so much easier to do if you have someone on your side who can listen to an interview and give you an audit. I do that often for my clients where we go through their episode and I'm like, here, this was okay, but we could do it better next time like this. And if we improve the audio by putting this kind of microphone in place instead of this one, it saves you so much trouble and so many mistakes over time if you have someone like you or me on your side to do it.
Absolutely. And one thing that I want to kind of get into is looking at that investment of either time or money or both. How are you approaching your clients or potential clients and asking them to make that investment? Are you, because like we talked earlier, I have a person I'm working with and they want to do a podcast, but the idea of purchasing 3 cameras and lights and setting up mics and setting up this whole space is a lot for them. And you kind of gave me some good advice of just set up 2 mics and just start talking and just see how it feels. So like, how are you looking at talking to people about, hey, let's make this episode and make this investment into a podcast that's going to run for 20 episodes or 30 episodes at least? Like that's a lot of investment that people don't necessarily realize, and don't necessarily want to make. So how are you talking to them about making that investment, and what are the kind of steps you take to that approach?
Yeah. So if it's someone who wants a podcast, but may not yet have a microphone or even camera equipment, we really talk about how can we scale it back to its most basic form in the beginning. So for a lot of folks with solo shows, that looks like, can we get you a USB microphone and a webcam that is decent so that you can get your reps in, recording your episodes, feeling out if this is even something you want to do? Because if you invest thousands and thousands of dollars into the microphone, but you don't know if you have the skills to actually be a host, you're going to get into a situation where you might hate it, but you don't want to stop because you invested thousands of dollars into a microphone. So in the very beginning, just start with a USB microphone and a webcam. There's nothing wrong with that, as much as sometimes you get into like some circles of podcast snobbery, I will say. For most people, a USB microphone is going to be a great start. Then if you have guests and like if you have people who are actually going to come into your studio, that's when you can talk about investing in soundproofing and investing in microphones. But if the majority of your interviews, like us right now, are going to be virtual, investing in a Riverside or a Zencaster is going to pay off a lot more in the beginning than creating a studio that no one's going to come visit. So it's very business dependent, situationally dependent, but starting with the basics and just getting you into it, getting into making a decision. Do you like this? Is this the medium for you? And then building from there, rather than trying to go all or nothing and then kind of falling on your face because of it.
Absolutely. And I think there's also kind of like steps to it of like different levels that you hit of like there's the audio only, just sitting at your desk with a mic like we're doing, maybe virtual, and then you invest in a Riverside, which gives you a little bit better audio quality, better video quality, things like that. Then there's kind of the step of, okay, we're gonna maybe do it in person but audio only. We're gonna invest in maybe some nicer mics or just another mic, and we're gonna do some soundproofing in the room because echo can be really bad in a lot of bigger rooms. Like if you just want to walk into a conference room that you have in your office and do it, like that's probably not the best way to do it because the echo is just going to be atrocious. And I just had this happen with a client. I was reviewing some of the video we shot, and like we shot it in a conference room and the echo was not the best. So it wasn't the greatest shooting scenario. And then, if you want to go up to the video side of it, again, like the sound, maybe you do the soundproofing, but also like looking at some cameras. And also I kind of speak this from the videography side of it. Like cameras are an investment. So, there's a level to where I think that it is important to invest in some nicer quality cameras. Like maybe not, like you don't need a Sony A9 that's $5,000 for just the body and a $2,500 lens. Like that's not the type of investment I'm talking about, but like understanding like what that investment actually looks like cameras do cost thousands of dollars, lenses do cost in the thousands of dollars. You can find them used for hundreds or maybe the low thousands, but that's kind of the level you're thinking of an investment. And so I think that wherever you're comfortable, start at those levels, but also like realize that there's a little bit of investment you have to make no matter what. I think soundproofing, like you talked about with the like YouTubing, like or YouTubers, like audio is way more important than video a lot of the time. And people are like when I watch YouTube videos, half the time I'm not even looking at the YouTube video because I'm so familiar with the person that's on the camera. I'm just listening to it. And if the audio is bad, I probably wouldn't even do that. So I think that, it's important to just start the podcast, whatever you're going to do get your reps in like that. But also there is a little bit of investment you need to make in, whatever you're doing. Put some time into it, put some effort into it, because if you don't, people will see through that and not really want to like listen or watch.
Yeah. And also there's the investment piece on the other side, which is you can have a $5,000 camera and a $5,000 microphone and all the audio proofing in the world. But if you don't know how to make good content, you don't know how to speak well, or you don't know how to get an idea across in an efficient way, then that microphone and that camera don't do much for you. And so people are more likely to listen to subpar audio, not terrible audio, but subpar audio, if the content is really great, than the other way around. Because it's just something where we have such limited attention. And it's not even just because, the whole theories of like, we spend too much time on TikTok and we only have 3 seconds of attention, but also because we do have access to so much information that if you can't tell it to me well in 5 minutes, I can find someone else who can. And so invest just as much time in your content creation and in becoming a better speaker and becoming a more confident speaker, as much time and money into that as you do into your equipment.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of goes back to what you were talking about with like getting your reps in and getting, doing the different things that you need to do, whether it's just recording some podcasts that you aren't even going to release, but kind of figuring that out, or it's, figuring out topics that you can actually speak on with authority. So like if you're in real estate, for example, maybe you're not as, an authority in the construction side of it and like selling new builds, but maybe you are really good with first-time home buyers. And so that's a place where you can really start to talk about. And then maybe, as you learn, as you grow your business side of it, you maybe get into construction and then you talk about like, oh, I've started doing construction. This is what I've learned. This is the tips I have for home buyers who want to build, like things like that, as opposed to just kind of starting out and just talking about anything. Because like you said, confidence is really important. Being really good at, just talking and being able to carry a conversation is really important. And the other thing I think that is really important to understand with anybody that's in podcasts, like it should be somewhat of a long-term commitment. Like you're not going to start out by getting 1,000 downloads on every single episode, unless you have some sort of a brand behind it that will drive traffic to that podcast. It's going to be a little bit of a long-term commitment. You're also going to work things out. So, maybe that first episode, it was way too long for your listeners. Let's shorten it a bit. Or maybe my answer, I just rambled on for 10, 20 minutes on a topic. I could cut that down to 5 minutes and we can move on to a different question. Like those things that you're doing with a podcast, like you need to just work them out and record episodes and just talk and figure it out and figure out what feels good with you. And the only way you're going to do that is just by sitting in front of a camera, in front of a microphone and recording it. Because then anything other than that, you're just in your head thinking and your thoughts run and there's no action there. So you really have to take some action if you want to get better at starting a podcast or just get better at podcasting.
Yeah. And with that, it's also bringing in the right people to help you speed that up, because you gave the example of a realtor who's doing this. How are you going to put in all these reps of trying all of these podcasting techniques and then review it when you're not really sure what you're reviewing for and give yourself feedback and build, while you're also doing 10 open houses in a week and you're also trying to get new people into your contact list and all the things that realtors have to do?
Yeah.
It's very difficult. And so you don't have to drop thousands and thousands of dollars, but finding a strategist or finding someone who is really going to work with you to say, hey, I can take on a lot of that mental load and teach you the mistakes that you want to avoid and just get around that quicker so that it makes sense for you. Because again, yes, you can figure it out on your own if you didn't have to do your actual job on top of it.
Yep. I think that kind of goes back to like the time investment of like, it is a big time investment to do a podcast, and not only do it, but do it right. I think that there's a bit of a difference there. If you just sit down in front of Zoom and record it through Zoom and, put that video out, just raw audio, that's like, that may not take a lot of time, but it's not going to sound good and it's not going to look good unless you maybe have a little bit of lighting or you have a mic or something like that. But if you are willing to put in some time, put in some effort, talk to a strategist, talk to a producer, maybe go into if like a producer has their own home studio or a studio in their office, they can go into like all of these different things. If you want to put in a little bit of investment, you can take that podcast from maybe a 2 to a 7 and then keep going from there. It takes time. It takes investment. It takes reps. Like you said, like my first podcast that I put out, I thought it was okay, but I could have done a lot better. And now like that I'm in, I think this is like episode 18 or 19 that we're recording right now, maybe 20 at this point. But like, I feel like quality wise and time wise and like how I carry myself, I've improved so much. So, and like, that's only because I decided to dedicate some time and effort and put in my reps on these podcasts and not, put out 3 that I was like, okay, those are okay. And then like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I kept pushing at it. So I think it's really important to, again, look at this as a long-term thing. Maybe, put it out for a year, see how you feel it go. And also another thing that I've kind of seen is you don't have to release an episode every week. You don't have to release, 3 episodes a week if you're doing shorter content. You could do every 2 weeks to start and then go for a week. I personally chose to do every week just because I wanted to have more content and more, I wanted to talk to more people and have these kind of sort of interviews. But if that's not your style, or if you have a platform that is, more apt to listening every 2 weeks, or that's just the time commitment you have is like every 2 weeks, that's just what you can do, that's totally fine. And it's just is what it is. And you can, grow and move forward from there.
Absolutely. And what you bring up about it being a long-term commitment is also understanding that people's listening habits are different. People are not going to respond in the way you expect them to right away. And so what that looks like is maybe you've been putting out episodes for 6 months and you've consistently gotten 20 listeners every week. And then you guested on someone else's show, or you somehow gained more leads because you went to a small business expo, and now you have a huge spike, but it's a huge spike in people are listening to the last 6 months worth of episodes. And so you want to experiment and you want to have intention with all of your episodes because they are long form. They are more evergreen type content compared to an Instagram reel or a TikTok. And so trusting that if you keep going, you can find ways to grow your audience and to make all of your content valuable. So don't get discouraged if you are seeing low numbers for the first 6 months or the first year even, because they always have an opportunity to recirculate, to be repurposed, you can always repost that episode later on. And it's just it has so much more of a shelf life than any of your other content does.
Yeah, I love what you talked about with evergreen content. I've noticed that with my podcast a little bit, where like, my first episode, when I first released it, that first week got 18 listens, I think was the number. And now it may be up to like 30, 40, 50, because just people have gone back and listened to that person. Or like another thing that could happen is maybe that person, you interviewed with them when they were maybe starting out their business, and then they get a big project or they get a big contract or they're in the news for something hopefully positive, and that kind of gets a spike on your interview because people are looking like, oh, like I've never heard of this guy, like who is he, like I'm gonna look for content with him and hear him speak. And if they search in Spotify or whatever, like interview with Noah Hutton or whatever, and then they find that interview with you, that can drive listens as well. So I think it is really important to see podcasting as not like a piece of content that's going to change your life in a week. It is a piece of content that people are going to listen to and go back to, every few, or they're just going to go back to when they kind of discover your podcast, which is a mindset that maybe not many people understand. But I go back and listen to old podcasts all the time. Like if I am listening to a new podcast that I am curious about, I'll go back and like listen to like an episode with the person I know, and maybe that's 20 episodes back, but I recognize like Brad Pitt or whatever, and I'm like going to listen to that episode as opposed to a newer episode that I don't know who that is, but I'd rather listen to something I know more, if that makes sense.
Yes. And it also is something that can be recirculated based off of relevance. So you can if someone comes up in the news, you can take the approach of, oh, I'm going to email my email list about that interview, even if it was 2 years ago, and just say, hey, have you been hearing a lot about Selena Gomez right now on TikTok? I did an interview with her. Here's the podcast episode link to that. How has she changed in the last 2 years, right? You can spin it. Or if you do solo shows and there's something that's coming up for you a lot in your Instagram DMs, where people will use the real estate example again, are asking about the best practices when you are doing an open house, and you have an episode about that, even if it was from 6 months ago or a year ago, you can say, hey, I actually have a show episode about it. Here you go. Let me post it again on all my socials, and it gains traction, and you didn't have to create a brand new piece of content to answer that frequently asked question.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really smart way of going about it, especially if your podcast is more like advice-based and tips-based and educational-based. Like you have topics that are hopefully going to be evergreen in the future, like marketing top tips. Like the marketing strategies do change every once in a while, but I feel like that's very circular, and it can go back to oh, well, like Instagram is prioritizing photos again, so here's how to optimize your photos on Instagram or something like that. Like I did a 15-minute podcast about how to optimize your photos on Instagram, so here's that again. I think that is a really smart way of going about and using your content, not just for that week that you put it out, that 2 weeks you put it out, but putting it out again or recirculating again. I want to kind of transition the conversation a little bit into talking about growing your podcast and things that you can do to kind of get more listeners and get more people to watch your podcast. 'Cause I think that's something that we've talked about, how it's more of a long-term play. You have to have a little bit of a long-term mindset to it, but also like you do need to grow it. You need to kind of get more listeners in the future. So what are your kind of, when you look at a podcast, maybe it's getting consistently, 20, 30 listeners an episode, but let's get it into 50, 60, 70 or 100 listens an episode. What are you kind of first seeing with that podcast? Like, let's say you come into a new podcast and you have to do an audit of it. What are some of the things that you're looking at, and what are some of the things that people can change and adjust to add some growth to those numbers?
Yeah, so super interesting question. I actually normally don't pay too much attention to the listener numbers themselves. I am much more interested in demographic data and in your conversion data, just based off of the focus that I have with my clients. Mm-hmm. So we are looking a lot more initially during an initial audit. We're looking a lot more at how many email list subscribers have you had? How many people have followed you on Instagram because of your podcast or whatever your main social media platform is. And if you have consistently 20 followers or 20 listeners every week, and you're using something like a Spotify for podcasters, formerly known as Anchor, you can get their demographic data. And so if you're targeting women in their 30s, are you getting women in their 30s? Are you totally off base? And maybe that means you either have to shift your messaging or you have to shift your target audience. I'm looking a lot more at that, because a service-based entrepreneur, like I'm usually working with, or a coach, does not need the thousands of listeners because they have a capacity of like 6 clients at a time anyway. We're looking more at, is that very focused? So with that, if we see, okay, they have 20 people who are very in their target audience and have converted, but we need more just to keep the pipeline going, then we're going to look at things like, can we do group engagement? So throwing it old school, like maybe that it does mean going into a Facebook group if it's very relevant to you. Maybe that looks like going into a Discord if you have a niche audience like that. It could also mean going into Instagram and doing some engagement there. It doesn't have to look like the cheesy, like, oh, love it, girl, under a comment, or being like, wow, great post. Like genuine engagement, genuine connection to people. So let's say you have 500 followers on Instagram right now, and you know that obviously not all 500 have checked out your podcast, but some of them are engaging with your content. You can reach out to them and say, hey, I looked through your profile and I think you would love this episode. Here's the link to it. Let me know your feedback. Would love to get to know you. And so you took the time to look through their profile. You took the time to understand, like, hey, they might really relate to someone who, this guest that I did who has 2 kids and is talking about entrepreneurship as a mom, and they're a parent, as they've posted about on their thing, I think they would relate to that. So you built that connection yourself rather than just doing like a, hey girl, can you check out my podcast? Would love to hear your feedback, XOXO. It's a bit more intentional. So doing things where you're building that human connection and people actually want to listen to you rather than feeling like you're just forcing it on them. And then I mentioned this to you in our pre-call, but taking the time to really appreciate your current listeners. So if you have 10 or 20 listeners and you can pinpoint at least 5 of them by name, sending them a small video, it can take 10 seconds, sending them a small video on Instagram, filming yourself and just saying, hey, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to me to know that you've consistently come back. I would love to hear what other topics or guests you would like us to have on. Have a wonderful day. That 10-second video will make it so much more likely for that person to share your podcast with someone else because they're like, wow, that person cared enough to connect with me. And it's just building more of a bond. And so those things aren't scalable to hundreds of thousands of listeners. But in those early stages where you're still under 100 weekly listeners, it can really change the game for you and build that loyal following from the jump.
Yeah, I know you talked about kind of doing the non-scalable things first, and I think it was from like the Masters of Scale podcast you said, but like doing, these things that, it's taking time. You're making it personal. You're making it intentional. Like you said, like not just commenting on our 50 random posts, like nice post, great job, love it. Like those things. Maybe you're getting your name out there a little bit, but it's not super intentional. And people, I think, see through that a lot, especially younger people. I think a lot of younger people are way more intelligent than a lot of, maybe adults give them credit for. They see into those like lame, kind of not super intentional things really easily. And so taking that effort, making a video, people can see, like, especially if you're doing it like selfie style, like people see that you are actually making that video and you're not just like sitting in front of a camera and so producers behind you or whatever, like making it very intentional, making it very personal, putting in a little bit of effort there. I think we've talked about a lot, like putting in some effort, doing the work to kind of grow your podcast is a big theme of this podcast. So I think those are really great steps, especially if you're early, doing the non-scalable things.
Yes. And doing them, again, I want to emphasize, like, with the relevant people. So another thing about that strategy of just going into 100 posts and doing love it, nice post, is that you don't even know if they're people who will relate to your content. So set yourself up for success by finding people who will relate. So for example, for the rest of us, you want to find entrepreneurs in their 20s who want to find other entrepreneurs in their 20s, not just listen to the 40-year-olds and the 50-year-olds who made it 30 years ago when the internet wasn't around. And so it's being able to add those layers of intention, and also really getting honest with yourself with, right now, do I need 2,000 listeners every week? Or is that just an ego number that I want to feel good about myself? Or can I feel good about myself before I get there because I'm really proud of what I put out, because I'm really confident in the message that I'm sharing and I know it's valuable and I'm getting results in other ways. For example, if you are focused on conversion, you're getting results through conversion. Or if you're focused more on eventually building a large brand, are you building a brand that you can stand behind for years to come instead of just going for the virality, going for the quick clicks that might actually jeopardize your integrity and jeopardize your authenticity? So it's all of those questions that I encourage people to look into before asking themselves growth for the sake of growth.
Yeah. I think, you talked about like a lot of people don't need 2,000 listeners. They don't need, and the same thing for business. Like maybe like I couldn't handle 20 retainer clients right now. I am one person. I don't need that. So like the same thing for like the businesses you're talking about, like coaches, they can't successfully and intentionally coach 20 people at a time. They can maybe do 5 or 6 at most. And so I think it's also important to like looking at what does your business really need. And same for like for me, it's like real estate agents. If I'm working with a real estate agent, can you handle 40 listings on the market by yourself? Probably not. So maybe you don't need the intention that's going to drive all that business. Maybe you need 5 good listings a month or 8 good listings a month or whatever, things like that. We're like really looking at like, what is the purpose of the podcast? What is my goal with the podcast? I think that's really important to look at. Like, what is my actual goal with this podcast? If it's to get 40,000 listeners a month or whatever, maybe you need to have some big name guests on and you need to do all these things. But like, if that is very valuable to you, then that's one thing. But if your goal of the podcast is to share information and, build relationships and build connection, keeping it at 20, 30, 40 listeners a month for at least a start, and reaching out to those people and saying like, hey, I'm doing, a meetup, or I'm doing, an event or a online webinar just for my listeners. Things like that are really important to keep your podcast intentional. Cause I think that's, a really big thing with building, a very personal podcast.
Yes, it's just simply asking yourself why. Why do you need the 20,000? And a lot of the times it's the hard answer is, oh, I just think it looks good. I think it sounds good to say I have a 20,000 listener podcast base.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of closing out the podcast, I think this podcast has just been tips and tricks and stuff like that. But is there anything else that you can kind of share with the listeners about kind of the work you do and things that you would recommend to people in the podcasting space?
Yeah. So super basic tip that I think helps a ton of people is do your brainstorming and your outlining on separate occasions, which I know most people don't want to hear because they think, well, I just want to get this outline done in 15 minutes. But if you can have a brainstorm where you just thought dump anything you want to say, or you do a brainstorming if you have guests and you just collect all the links you can and all the information about them that you can. And then in a separate instance, you actually sit down to do the outline and reflect back on it. You're going to have a much smoother outlining process and a better episode at the end because you took time to do those two things separately. Obviously outline way before you record. So that's a very practical one that I actually see change people's episodes really quickly. The other thing is just based off of what we were just talking about, go into podcasting with the intention of putting out your message into the world. Something that I say a lot is your impact deserves to be shared. And I truly believe that for everyone. And so what is that impact? And is it good enough for you for that impact to be shared with 5 or 10 people at a time before you go to thousands? And most of the time it is, if you really know that what you're putting out is important and going to create some sort of transformation for people. So go into podcasting or go into social media, whatever it is, the creative endeavor, knowing that you will impact and change people's lives. It just may be one person at a time, not 100,000 at a time.
Absolutely. And I love that first tip you said of like brainstorming and then outlining separately, because I think for people, a lot of people like me who have a really hard time focusing on like long-term projects and like like I can't sit down for 2 hours, even an hour, and do one thing. Like that's just not how I work. I can maybe do 30 minutes, 45 minutes before I get distracted. So if I sit down and I'm like, okay, who do I want to have on this week? And I'm like going through Instagram and I'm looking for young entrepreneurs that I think are really interesting and I want to talk to. Maybe I have a list of them, and then maybe I DM them as I go. But then like actually setting time aside to outline my episode for each of them is going to, create a better episode for each. Because if I try to, let's say I find you on social media, I find Isabella on social media, I reach out to her, she said yes, and I'm already thinking about questions. Like it's just too much going on at one time. But if I say like, okay, I have Isabella this week, I have Ashton next week, I have Nick the next week, and I have Catherine the next week. That's like all I do. And then like each week I'm doing like 2 outlines for each episode. Like I'm spending an hour just outlining and researching and looking up like old work they did and listening to maybe an episode of their podcast or an interview they did, or like if they're an artist, listening to their music, like things like that, really getting into the headspace of that podcast. So you have really good like focused notes and really high quality things to talk about, as opposed to trying to do everything at once and just like doing like 10% of your effort on everything because you're just trying to do a lot and not gaining focus on one, which I think is something that can really help people like me who do not focus well.
Yes. And even things outside of podcasting. I heard the tip before of plan for your least productive self, not your most productive self. And so take, for example, going to the gym. Most of us plan and say, we're going to go every day for an hour. And we don't plan for the days where we wake up and we didn't get enough sleep or we have a long day ahead. And so how can you plan for that version of you and know that it's going to happen? We're all human, instead of always planning for like Superman or Superwoman version of you.
Yeah, I love that. That's something that I probably need to do a little bit better, because like there are days where like this morning I woke up and I feel like I had a decently productive day, but I woke up and I was like, this is not going to be a productive day. Like I just not feeling it. It's Monday. Like it's just not a good start to the week. But if you plan for only getting 2 things done in the day or whatever, and then you get 4 because you completed those 2 and you feel motivated and you have extra time, that's a great feeling to kind of motivate yourself for the week, rather than like, I planned for 4, I only got 2. Now I'm disappointed in myself. I think it's a great like mental trick to play on yourself, or just a mindset to have for basically anything in life, but it's like specifically for podcasting in this sense. But so again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. If people want to find you online, where can they go to find you?
Absolutely. So the first place I send people to is my podcast, Visible with Isa Media Inc. That's Isa with 1 S, ISA. And then on Instagram, I'm at Isa Media Inc., ISA Media INC. And on there, you're going to hear tips on getting visible, whether that's through podcasting or other marketing mediums. And usually my Instagram is a lot of content from my podcast as well. So all kind of an ecosystem, and you'll get to see how also I use the podcast more as a marketing vehicle. And yeah, I hope to hear from more people who are followers of the rest of us. And hopefully this is not our last conversation either.
Absolutely not. Yeah, I'm planning at the end of the year to kind of have a little bit of a like a looking back episode type thing, where I have all of my guests on that I'd had throughout the year and be like, hey, how was your 2023? What was your year? So that's something I'm planning, and I'm hoping maybe have you back on for that, and just kind of talk a little bit about, what was 2023 like for you, growth, things like that. So we can talk about that more offline. But
yes.
Again, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and we will see you next time on the Rest of Us podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Rest of Us podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider leaving a rating or review on the podcasting platform of your choice. It really helps me see that you are enjoying the episode, and also helps other people see the podcast. Also, please consider giving a follow on social media. All the links will be in the show notes down below. Also, in the show notes, there is a link to the Rest of Us newsletter. This is a platform where I'll send out different takeaways from the episode, resources that were mentioned in the episode, and also notifications about new episodes. So make sure you click the link to subscribe there. So episodes are released weekly, and I will see you then on the next episode of the Rest of Us podcast.